Hello, welcome back to the Phoenix's Tale. I am your host, Gabe. We are continuing with Chamber of Secrets this week with Chapter 15, Aragog. So let's dive into the recap real quick. So yes, we meet another one of Hagrid's monster friends, Aragog. Aragog is an acromantula, which is basically a giant talking spider. Harry and Ron are now spending time looking for the spiders to follow based on Hagrid's less than cryptic message when he was escorted out of his cabin when he was taken to Azkaban. Meanwhile, the rest of the school is scared, but they are warming to Harry again, knowing, as Ernie Macmillan says in Herbology to Harry one day, that he knows that he would never have attacked Hermione. Anyway, Ron and Hermione, Harry and Ron find some spiders to follow and decide to get Fang and head into the forest to see what they can find. Along the way, they find the Ford Anglia that has been just rumbling around the Forbidden Forest after it crashed into the Whomping Willow as we open this story. And eventually they find Aragog, who tells the boys that Hagrid didn't open the chamber last time, which is what they figured, and describes the monster that Aragog and his family fear. However, Aragog is not loyal enough to Hagrid to protect Harry and Ron from his family of spiders eating them. Before that happens, thankfully, the Anglia rescues him. And once back to the castle, Harry, thinking over everything Aragog had told him, realizes that the student who died last time the chamber was open was Moaning Myrtle. So, this week I did need to get some deeper assistance from Perplexity to flesh out some different psychological themes. And as always, Perplexity did not fail me. So we'll be diving into some smaller memories I hold on each of these topics that we're going to talk about here. One such topic is... Let me check my notes. Yep, we're good. Okay, so the first topic we're going to talk about is fear and facing the unknown, which obviously comes up a lot for Harry and Ron in this chapter, because it explores confronting those fears. As Harry and Ron enter the Forbidden Forest and interact with giant spiders, a classic fear trigger, especially for Ron. This can relate to psychological responses to fear and anxiety. And for this first topic, I did talk before about the week-long nature camp that I attended when I was in 6th grade, specifically the night hike, where each of us took it in turns to walk a short stretch of the path on our own. I was terrified at the idea, and thankfully my cabin leader told me to walk in just far enough to be out of sight of the group still waiting to wait for her. And incredibly, I did the entire thing without waiting for her. Granted, it wasn't that long of a stretch. I mean, probably not even a quarter of a mile, if I remember correctly. But having to do so in the dark, in the mountains, alone, while having a disordered home life, because this was about the same time that my parents split up. I don't remember the timing of it specifically, but they did split up sometime when I was in 6th grade. So even if they hadn't split up by then, by the time I went, because it was at the beginning of the school year, I remember, there was definitely a lot of tension going on at home. So I had all this going on, and you expect me to walk in the dark in the mountains by myself. Yeah, I was fucking terrified. I'm just going to say that. So let's talk a little bit about misjudgment and prejudice. Aragog was wrongly accused of being the monster that Harry and his fellow Hogwarts students are hearing about. This highlights themes of scapegoating and how fear can lead to false assumptions about others, tying into more social psychology concepts. Yeah, okay, I just glanced at my notes. Yeah, this reminds me of a time in high school during my sophomore year. I was on the dance team, and this dance team, I went to a small high school here in Michigan. We had maybe 300 students across the final 4 grades, 9, 10, 11, 12. And somehow, throughout this process, the dance team, we were kind of the entertainment at the halftime for our basketball games. I know. It was a cheesy high school thing. But anyway, somehow all of the other girls on the team turned on me. And my friend at the time, who was also on the dance team with me, I don't know why they turned on the two of us, but they did. The crux of the problem was the fact that my co-captain, I was the team captain, was jealous because she had been on the team as a co-captain the year before, and thought she deserved the top spot over me. Our advisor chose me because I was quite responsible, and I just took charge of a couple things that bitch didn't want to do. So it was her own lack of action and responsibility that lost her the top captaincy that I got. So it wasn't my fault, it was hers, basically. Anyway, there were rumors about me having sex all over the place because of the difference in the current slang for Gen X. I grew up in California mostly, so my slang was specific to this story was making out, was basically French kissing. Necking, as our parents would call it, the boomer parents would call it. But that was that's making out. Making it, that was sex. So I get here and, I dated this guy my sophomore year and talking about, oh yeah, we made out a lot. Meaning, passionate kissing. They took it to mean sex. And I remember when this all came, and I says, who the hell said that I was having sex? All I said was that I made out. Well, that's sex. No, that's just kissing. You people are so fucking backwards. You need to spend some time in California to get your lingo straight. I mean, yeah, you want to talk about misjudgment and prejudice. I mean, they all hated me, and it ended up being quite a relief when the basketball season was over, because no, I did not try out for the dance team the following year because that bitch was now a senior and she was going to piss and moan about not being the captain. Whatever. So let's talk about trust and risk-taking. Harry and Ron's decision to trust Aragog despite danger exemplifies issues of assessing trustworthiness and risk in relationships. And I want to talk about this topic because it's something that I have been struggling with my entire life, specifically the idea that just because I trust someone's judgment of another person does not mean that the third person they trust feels right to me. Okay, I got to clear this up a little bit because that sounds kind of confusing. So let's use Harry Potter characters. So let's say that I am best friends with Ginny Weasley. Okay, Ginny Weasley really likes, let's not say Luna Lovegood, let's say Angelina Johnson. Okay. And I think the reason why I'm being so specific about this is because I have been burned on this quite a few times. But just because I trust Ginny's judgment, and I trust Ginny's judgment, does not mean... Ooh, I just thought of another example. I'll get with you in a minute. Does that mean that I automatically trust Angelina just because Ginny does? Okay, I hope that made it clear. One example is someone my brothers and I have always claimed as a surrogate grandfather. Especially, we met them probably about a year before my parents split up, just to give some context. So there was just something about him that I never trusted, and I've never been able to put my finger on specifically what that is. And he's long since died, like I said, grandfather, figure. So it's no big deal anymore, but he was somebody my mom really trusted. And I do want to say that the part of him that I didn't trust had nothing to do with any creepy vibes. I never got the creepy vibe from this guy. It was just, I just didn't really like him. I didn't really trust him, even though my mother fully did. It was, I think the best way to describe this is that I just couldn't see what was so wonderful about him, that my mother was just like, oh, she just loved this guy. Surrogate father kind of, to her, okay, great, but really? I don't get that. Which is not unlike Harry's mistrust of Snape. That's what I'm circling back to. He trusted Dumbledore, and throughout the series we hear from other people, well, I trust Dumbledore, therefore I trust Snape. Yeah, I'm a lot more particular when it comes to things like that. I don't automatically trust people who give me some kind of vibe. So if I were in Harry's shoes, no, I wouldn't trust Snape either. Just because I trust Dumbledore and Dumbledore trusts him, Dumbledore never gave Harry anything to adequately explain why he trusts Snape so much. In the end, we do understand why. But throughout this entire series, Harry rightfully did not trust Snape. And that's how I tend to be. And what's interesting to me, as somebody who likes to people watch and somebody who enjoys psychology and somebody who likes figuring people out, it's always interesting to me how many people, at the very least, act like they trust that third person. So, for anybody out there in Harry's position, they automatically trust Snape because they trust Dumbledore. And Dumbledore trusts Snape. Instead of trusting themselves to say, Snape's not a good guy here. I do not trust him, and I think you're wrong in this. I see too many people fall into the trap that a lot of other people throughout the story did in trusting Snape simply because they trusted Dumbledore, if that makes any sense. So this was kind of a similar thing for me. It's like I could just never understand what it was about this guy, this surrogate father to my mom, this surrogate grandfather to me and my brothers, especially after my parents split up. There was just something there, and to this day I still don't know what it is. But he's dead, died years ago. No big deal. But I just never could see what it was my mom found about this guy. I just never quite trusted him for some reason. Didn't like him. Okay, next question. How do I summon courage when the unknown feels like a threat? I like this one. And I want to share something with you that has helped me for decades. And it is quite important because it has to do with that negative narrative my verbally abusive father programmed into my brain. And this was sometime in the 90s when this occurred. So it was my second to last semester that I needed for my associate's degree. And so this had to have been in 1996. That semester I was just one credit short. And I needed that credit to keep my my financial aid. I had to be considered full-time. I needed 12 credits. The classes I had chosen, I only had 11, so I needed one more credit to keep my financial aid, and I found one. It was a beginning piano class, and this is something that I wanted to do for years, but I was always told that, and this was from my father, obviously, that I was going to suck at it and that it would be a waste of money for my parents, blah, 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 that sort of thing. Well, that same narrative was present, but I kept reminding myself that I would lose the financial aid if I withdrew, and there are no other classes that sounded enjoyable to me, so I was like, oh, okay, I got to take this class, but I got to deal with this anxiety either. So what I finally told myself that calmed that overwhelming anxiety, because my father's voice is ringing through my brain, is this: I was never going to know if I was any good at playing the piano until I actually did it. So I told myself to just enjoy the process and wait until the end of the semester to make any judgments about my performance, whether or not I was enjoying myself. And that's exactly what I did. And I have taken that advice to heart in many situations over the years. And the key to it is setting a time frame for yourself. As for the piano class, it met 3 times a week. And so I felt that the entire semester, all 16 weeks, would be an adequate period of time for me to just enjoy the process before deciding whether or not I wanted to continue on or let it go. And not all situations will require, a full 4 months, but that's going to be up to you. If you're going to try to use this, for yourself, whatever feels like an adequate period of time for you to just give it a go for that particular situation. It could be a week, it could be a month, it could be 6 months, it could be a year, whatever feels appropriate to you. And once you figure that out, write it down, put a note in your calendar app, whatever works for you, whatever will remind you that it's too soon to make any decisions, because that's going to happen. It cropped up a few times for me, especially that semester where I was taking the piano class. It cropped up a couple of times. I'm like, well, the semester's not over. Chill. Oh, that's right. I wasn't going to make any decisions about this until the end of the semester. So that's not to say that there won't be situations in which quitting right now would be a good thing, but I'm certain, because I'm certain there will be. But I reserve those for myself for anything that immediately drains me, makes me feel unsafe, etc. So there are moments where quitting is the best course of action. If it's simply a matter of nerves and, I suck at this, or I'm not really good at I'm not having fun with this because, you're so wrapped up in your own anxiety, that's one thing. But if you feel unsafe, if you feel that it's draining you, or the people involved are draining to you, and it becomes such a chore, go ahead and quit. Doesn't mean that you can't revisit that later, but there are moments where quitting right now are going to be a good thing. Okay. Just be very diligent about paying attention to how your body feels in this new environment. Okay. Another aspect to this is, let's say you set yourself up for 6 months. Okay, we got a check-in coming up in, 6 months, for example. But within the first 2 weeks that you want to continue on, don't worry about the check-in. I mean, I could have very easily have had so much fun in that piano class in the first month that I didn't need to check in, because I knew I was going to sign up for the next level of that piano class the next semester. I didn't. Ultimately, I realized that it just wasn't as fun for me as I thought it was, but I did get an A on it. So I knew that if that passion had sparked for me, I could have gone on to do very well as a pianist. But it just wasn't as much fun for me, and I was able to let it go. And again, that was 30 years ago, and I still am glad that I took the chance to give it a go, but I don't regret letting it go when I realized, this isn't quite for me. I hope this makes sense. But the key to all of that is finding that initial time frame and planning, and with the intention of sticking to it and being consistent. And when you reach your 1 month, 6 month, 1 year, check in. If you need a little bit more time, add a bit more time before making that decision. It's all very flexible, but don't stick with it if you don't feel safe. Okay, that's another key to that. How does living with untreated PTSD shape my perception of new or uncertain situations? Oof. This is interesting, because I'm willing to admit that my fear response does kick in a hell of a lot faster than it used to. However, I can acknowledge that it is a limiting factor for me, and I can still move forward no matter the situation. When it comes to routine doctor appointments and such, I get it done as soon as possible, no matter how I feel, because it's that, okay, I'm done with this for another year. That feels good, and it's off my list. Otherwise, if possible, I'll sit with it for a while before making a decision, because it is still quite difficult for me to discern whether I really just don't want to do something, or it's my trauma, sounding the red alert when there's no need for it to be going off. If I determine it's just my anxiety, and deep down I'm otherwise excited to engage in a particular activity, I utilize what I can to push myself forward. Just as I did with this podcast. I really wanted to get this up and running, but I had a lot of fear from the PTSD and my compromised nervous system. Therefore, it's a lot easier for me to push through on those days that I just don't want to work on it, because I can attach to the feeling of having a good therapy appointment. I had a really good session. I always feel better when I can get a podcast episode researched, written, recorded, whatever. That's what I live for. I aim for, this is going to feel better when I'm done. If after much thought I realize that a particular activity just doesn't sound enjoyable to me, I'll let it go. There is a difference between your trauma saying no when everything else in your body says yes. Find a way to answer that yes and do it anyway. If your trauma is telling you no, but it's something you have to do, like doctor's appointments, find a way to get them done and off your list as soon as you can. If your body is saying no and you aren't as interested, I find this a lot, you aren't as interested in a particular experience, if you will. It's basically, if it's not worth fighting for, that's where I can figure out through my trauma that, this just doesn't really sound good to me. Because when it's something I really want to do, I'll find a way to do it, even through my own trauma. I hope that makes sense. And I'm not going to lie to you about this. It takes a lot of intention to work through everything, and you will trip up occasionally. If you watched my previous episode, I'm getting back on track. I'm a couple months late on getting these episodes out to you. Talked about that at the beginning of the episode last week. You'll get tripped up on things, especially when you're dealing with trauma and you haven't had the proper treatment, as I have. But it is imperative that you keep going, especially if a particular activity or situation is something you actually want. You are going to find a way to work around, work through, work over, work under, whatever your trauma, to make that experience happen, to make this, situation come to life, if you will. You'll find a way. It's all about learning to sit with yourself and doing so with intention. Okay, is this just my trauma speaking? Or do I really not want to do this? How has social isolation impacted my ability or willingness to trust others? I have actually been giving this question a lot of thought over the last few years. It's been nearly 6 years since I've discovered, through my abnormal psych class while I was working on my bachelor's degree, that I was dealing with PTSD. And at the time, it had been 7 years since the initial trauma response. I decided that I will be a lot more discerning with others, and I do tend to test people if I feel like something is off and that I cannot, in fact, trust them. A lot of this has come about because of the social isolation and embracing the social isolation. One thing, for example, that I will be working on when I do meet new friends is being a lot more vocal about what I want in that relationship in regard to feeling safe and being able to trust them. If they can't handle it, then they aren't for me, and I have no problem with that. I've often spoken about the fact that I don't have emotional safe spaces here at home with my mom and my brother specifically. Thus meaning I literally have no one to talk to about things that just need to get out of my head. Another reason why, when I can get work done and I am productive, I do feel better after recording a podcast episode, for example. My brother, for example, he doesn't even care. And my mother has a big mouth. So I don't share much with them as to my personal plans for myself. And I am okay with that. I have learned to be okay with that. You must be discerning when it comes to having the right people in your inner circle, because not everyone deserves to know everything about you or what you are willing to share. Next question. What emotions come up when I feel isolated or disconnected? For the most part, I feel better. For the most part. My safety has always come from solitude, as I mentioned either earlier in this podcast episode. I've done this one and the previous one back to back, so my brain's kind of befuddled a little bit. Whereas others find safety in numbers, meaning they have a lot of friends. Yes, I do get bored occasionally, but there are a number of things that I do to stay busy. And it's not much given my current situation, but, keeping up with my chores so I have my end of the house is nice and clean and tidy the way I want. Getting a workout or two in throughout the week. Working on the podcast, etc. I also use my fantasy journal when I feel stuck or when I just need some sort of mental escape. And that's when I get to envision, my future and once I'm back on my feet financially and what that looks like. So kind of a check in with my vision board, if you will, is how I use my fantasy journal there. But all in all, it's given me a lot of time to think about what I want my life to look like as I get closer to the time when my efforts here do finally gain some traction and start showing financial success on some level for me. How do I use my story of loneliness to foster empathy and connection with listeners? I find that simply recording these podcast episodes has actually helped in those moments when I just need to get things out of my head. I always feel better once I have an episode complete and uploaded to YouTube. I can't say these things. My brother just walked through and I'm recording. I can't say a lot of these things to my mom or my brother because they don't care. But I trust that my story will find the people who needs to hear it for your own benefit. And that helps when I hit these moments of, this is just taking too long. I don't want people to feel sorry for me. I really don't. Because as I get closer to finally getting back on my feet, and that moment when I can say, yes, I'm back on my feet, the more clearly I can see that I needed the last 12 years to happen. I needed my entire life dismantled in order for me to rebuild in the way that I want, not what anyone else thinks I should want. So, looking at all of this from you've got time to think about this. Okay, what is it that I really want? And then start moving in that direction and do the best you can with whatever resources you have. Okay. What unexpected positive insights have arisen during my periods of social isolation? I really need to write these down because they would be of enormous benefit to those of you out there who are also struggling with social isolation. However, the most important one for me has been seeing questions like this on social media and thinking about what I want my life to look like when I can finally get back on my feet financially. Having the peace and quiet of being socially isolated has been exactly what I needed to figure out everything moving forward. What kind of car do I want to buy? Where do I want to live? What kind of clothes do I want to wear on the daily? How active or quiet I want my life to be, etc. When other people aren't around all the time, offering their opinions and everything else, it's easier to hear my own thoughts, and especially those of my own mind versus other people's opinions. How do I balance acknowledging my flaws with striving to be better? I have found that in acknowledging my flaws has helped me strive to be better because we all have flaws. Okay, nobody's perfect. We know this. Once I began acknowledging my flaws, however, it became easier to see my strengths and embrace those. Plus, the more comfortable I become in acknowledging my flaws, the less damage another can cause me when attempting to use my flaws to hurt me in some way. Somebody says something snarky, I can just look at them and, yeah, I know, what's your point? That's how I want to be when somebody tries to use my flaws or my weaknesses against me. How do I show compassion for myself on difficult days when progress feels ambiguous? This has been a labor of love for me. Now that I understand the reality of dealing with PTSD, and the more I learn about being autistic, it's easier for me to talk myself down, if you will. In fact, my mom's nurse at her last infusion treatment mentioned this. When it comes to some days, just getting out of bed is something to celebrate. And while it took me some time to do so, I have been doing a lot more for myself. I celebrate if I did one workout for the week. I celebrate when I clean my kitchen for the week. And that may be the only chore that I get done. I celebrate when I feed myself some days. Because, as I said in the last episode, healing is messy. And all the while, I remind myself that I do still need to rest and take care of myself on any given day, because PTSD is no joke. And having dealt with it for over 12 years with no help, I celebrate taking care of myself on those rest days where literally all I do is scroll social media or binge watch something on television. What messages would I give my younger self about growing, learning, and becoming? And I love this one because, first of all, I want to encourage all of you who are struggling with childhood trauma to do this. This ties to the idea of wishing our future self. You remember those times? I know I had moments like that where I'd be alone in my bedroom and being confused. I'm crying because my dad shouted at me for something that made no sense to me, but he didn't bother to explain the right way to do it. Whatever it was, this all ties back to the idea of wishing my future self would just show up and tell me what I needed to hear. Well, it's time that we be that future self. For the child version of us. No, we are not actually going back in time, back to the future style, but simply envisioning what we would say to our younger selves has done wonders for me. So stick with me here, because this is a newer tool that I have begun to utilize, and it's been helping. Again, it takes intentional action to accomplish this, but when I'm feeling uncertain because of that old narrative my father programmed, when I feel uncertain about something, I imagine myself at whatever age that particular situation has triggered. For this example, let's say that my 10-year-old self is who I see in my mind. Well, I simply tell her what I would have loved at the age of 10, future me to say to me. And more often than not, it's a recap of how and why we went no contact with our father. This is a group thing. We are a team, me and my younger self, my inner child. And a recap of how and why we went no contact with our father and how that feels now. What I have learned about myself, specifically what 10-year-old me didn't know at the time, and specifically choosing aspects that I didn't believe at the time, and most importantly, that she did not deserve the treatment because she did nothing wrong. The problem that entire time was him, not her, aka me. So basically, when something triggers a childhood wound, whatever age you are envisioning in that moment, tell yourself, whether it's a private journal, whether you mumble it to yourself, whether you say it aloud or just in your head, you be the future self that you wanted to rescue you at the age of 8, 10, 12 years old, whatever age it is. And you tell them what you wanted to hear at that age. Not empty platitudes, but from your experience. Listen, this happened. It sucked. I'm sorry. But guess what? When you're in your 20s, when you're in your teens in high school, when you're in your 50s, when you're whatever, this is going to happen. And make sure it is something that 8, 10, 12-year-old you didn't realize or didn't think would actually ever happen. That's the key. How can I use my experience with prejudice to educate or encourage empathy in others? I have some very strong feelings about this because as someone who is autistic, being an empath is part of my goodie bag, as it were, my autistic goodie bag. I've never understood how humans can treat other humans so poorly, and often because they were treated poorly. For example, when it comes to my son sharing something important with me, I always ask him how he wants me to handle it with his grandmother, meaning my mom, and his uncle, my brother. Does he want me to keep it to myself? Is it okay to tell them? If it's okay, if he wants me to keep it to myself, does he mean completely? Or is it okay to tell them if they ask me? I'm not going to volunteer, but if they ask, I'm very specific with my son about that because somebody, my mother, has a big mouth. And I know how frustrating it is to deal with somebody like that who has no programming. I swear to God, she doesn't even own the programming of maybe I shouldn't say anything to anybody about this. I don't think she has that. And I refuse to do that to him or to anybody else. So I just outright ask him, how do you want me to handle this? As for encouraging empathy in others, to a point, empathy can be learned with a simple saying. If somebody treated you like shit, do not treat someone else the same. I feel, especially with everything that's going on in the world, and specifically in this country, in the United States, over the last decade, that just because somebody treated you poorly does not give you the right to do the same to somebody else. All I can do is remind you multiple times if necessary to remember how awful it was to endure whatever that was, and to protect somebody else from experiencing that same pain. Too many broken people out there continue the abusive treatment of others because, well, I experienced it, others should too. When I prefer seeing it as, I experienced that and it fucking sucked. There is no way that I will treat another human being like that. So, on such a heavy note, that's going to do it for me this week. Next week, we're going to dive into chapter 16, The Chamber of Secrets. And until then, please be kind to yourself and to others. You didn't deserve that. It wasn't your fault. You deserve all the happiness in the world. And just because you went through a bunch of crap doesn't mean you have the right to treat other people the same way. Okay? So treat yourself and others with kindness. I'll see you next week.